This episode may contain content of a graphic nature, including descriptions of physical and sexual violence against adults, children, and animals. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi everyone, I'm Tanya.
And I'm Talia.
And we are Crimes and Consequences, a true crime podcast. Hey Talia.
Hi, Tanya.
How are you today?
Today's a great day.
That's awesome. I'm glad you're having a wonderful day.
I'm not going to ask about your day.
No.
We're just going to move on.
Let's move on.
I hope everybody else is doing amazing today.
Me too, because no one else should have a shit day today.
Nope, today's your turn.
But at least I can laugh about it.
So forget about your shitty day. But there's something I want you to remember.
Okay.
Tomorrow, I believe it's tomorrow, we're going to do a feed drop. Remember I told you?
Oh, yes. I remember.
It's for that demonic possession podcast, The Devil Within.
Yes.
So if you see that there's a new release tomorrow, it's not us. We haven't changed to demonic possession.
Not yet.
Not yet.
You give them a listen if that's the kind of thing you're into.
Are you ready for true crime? I am.
I'm ready. I've got a whole crazy story to tell you.
I can't wait.
All right.
Is it high on the gruesome scale?
Yes, it is gruesome.
All right.
I'm going to say it's a 10.
Oh.
It's maybe even more than a 10.
Well, shit and caboodle. All right.
So be warned, everyone, and I will let you know when the gruesome part comes. On November 24th, 2016, so this is a really recent case, 61-year-old Joel Guy Sr., who everyone called Mike, and his 55-year-old wife Lisa were hosting their family at their home in Knoxville, Tennessee for Thanksgiving. This was going to be the last holiday they were spending in this home in Knoxville because Mike and Lisa were moving about an hour and a half away to Surgoinsville, Tennessee. Mike and Lisa were retiring, and they had bought Mike's family home in Surgoinsville. Mike and Lisa were looking forward to the slower pace of living there. The home was on some land, and the town was much smaller than Knoxville. Surgoinsville has a population of about 2,000 people, where Knoxville is like almost 200,000 people. Not only were they excited to retire, but Mike and Lisa were anxious to get settled in their new home because they were also going to host Christmas that year there. They were planning a big celebration that included Mike's sisters and their families, as well as Mike and Lisa's children. Mike and Lisa had one son together, Joel Jr., who everyone called Joel Michael. So that's how I'm going to refer to him.
Joel Michael.
Joel Michael. He was 28 and lived in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And despite living so far away, he still had all access to his parents' home in Knoxville. He had a key and a garage door opener that Mike had programmed for him. Despite the fact that he was 28 and lived so far away, Mike and Lisa still financially supported him. He still had his bedroom at his parents' house in Knoxville where it had furniture and clothes and childhood things like toys. So he hadn't fully...
He still had toys in his bedroom?
Mm-hmm, like from his childhood.
Okay.
Joel Michael traveled to Knoxville from his home in Louisiana, which was about 650 miles one way. He always came for Thanksgiving. He planned to spend that holiday not only with his parents, but his half-sister Michelle and her 3 sons were coming. Michelle was Mike's daughter from his first marriage, and in addition to Michelle, Mike had 2 other daughters from that marriage. One was Angela, who was Michelle's twin, and Shandice, and I think Shandice was older. Mike had divorced his first wife when the twins were just a year old, and by the time they were 3, Mike had married Lisa. The girls, when they were growing up, they've only known Lisa to be there. They absolutely loved her and adored her, and they loved spending time with their dad and Lisa in the summers when they came to visit. Michelle especially admired Lisa while she was growing up. She thought that Lisa was a perfect mother and wife, and decided when she grew up she wanted to be just like Lisa. When the girls were children, they lived primarily with their mother, who was a single mom, and things were financially tight. Michelle especially loved visiting her dad and Lisa because they seemed to always have meals together, and they had a full fridge, and they were really tight-knit. Mike and Lisa had their Knoxville home, which was located on Golden View Lane, for sale, since they were purchasing this other home in Surgoinsville. And fortunately, it had sold right before Thanksgiving. Due to the sale, they had to be moved out of the house by December 13th. And they were busy moving things from Knoxville to their new home, like back and forth.
How far was their new home from Knoxville?
It was about an hour and a half. As a matter of fact, the day after Thanksgiving, Friday the 25th, Joel Michael was going to help his parents move their boat to Surgoinsville. The Thanksgiving holiday that year was like many others before it. Michelle arrived at Mike and Lisa's at about 10 a.m. that morning, and the holiday preparations were well on their way. Lisa was busy cooking a feast in the kitchen, and Michelle was all too eager to help her stepmother with the preparations. Joel Michael was there as he was every Thanksgiving, and in addition to Michelle and her 3 boys, Michelle's boyfriend arrived to the home a bit later that day. Throughout the day, the family spent time in the garage like they always did. The garage was like an extension of the home for the Guy family. They hung out there smoking cigarettes, gossiping, and telling the same funny family stories over and over. Like, you know how when you get with your family, you just tell the same funny stories. Joel Michael usually didn't hang out with the rest of his family during the holidays and usually spent most of the days in his room. Michelle wasn't even sure if Joel Michael knew the names of her children. Just to give you an idea of their relationship.
It's the world's shittiest uncle.
Mm-hmm. However, this holiday was different. Joel Michael spent a lot of time with his family and even gave Michelle's sons some of his old toys that were still in the home.
That part's just fucking weird.
I know.
By the way, he's 28 years old with his toys.
Michelle thought it was really unusual because, I'm just going to say it, Joel was kind of the quiet, weird kid that no one was really close to in the family. Michelle noticed that he was particularly outgoing with her children that Thanksgiving holiday. And he was really excited to give them some of his old toys. And one of the things he gave them was a collection of Beanie Babies that he had.
Oh my
You remember those,
God,
right?
Of course. What the hell is this? Okay, no, I'm going to say it right now. No grown man should have a collection of Beanie Babies. I don't care if you send me a hate review, hate mail. I'm just drawing the line.
He gave them just a big plastic storage tote with Beanie Babies in it.
Oh, Jesus.
I know, it's
Mary
just
and
bizarre.
Joseph, what is this shit?
Michelle's dryer at her house had broken in the days prior to Thanksgiving, and she had asked Mike and Lisa if it was okay if she brought her dirty laundry along with her, and asked if she could use their washer and dryer, which, of course, they had no problem with. When she brought her first load of laundry into the house, she had passed Joel Michael's car in the driveway and noticed there was a couple of blue Sterilite plastic storage tubs in his backseat. At first she was confused and didn't understand why he was using the storage totes to transport his suitcases for the trip to Mike and Lisa's. But besides her initial confusion, she really didn't think any more about it.
Maybe he had a lot of Beanie Babies.
Well, that storage tote was already in the house. Maybe he wanted to take some back to Baton Rouge.
Maybe it's for his teddy bear collection.
I know, right? Michelle stayed and celebrated the holiday with her dad and stepmother until about 10 p.m. When she left, everything at the home seemed just fine.
Really quick, where's her twin?
I don't think she came that day. It was unclear to me if the other sisters came, but I had watched the trial for this case, and they all testified. All the sisters did. And some of their testimony was really short. Michelle's was very long. So I'm thinking that Michelle was the only one that year to have gone to Thanksgiving.
Something I noticed, though, is when I did that whole trial of Aliana, is when I did it on YouTube, they didn't necessarily have all the witnesses.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Who knows? Anyway.
But I did see Angela and Chardice testify.
Okay.
They might have called them later, though. The day after the holiday, Joel Michael did accompany his parents to their new home in Surgoinsville, transporting their boat to the new resting place as they had planned. But Friday, November 25th would be the last day that anyone would hear from Mike and Lisa. As I mentioned before, Mike and Lisa were retiring. Lisa was supposed to go to work the day after the Thanksgiving holiday, that Friday. As a matter of fact, it was her last work day before her retirement. However, she didn't show up that day to Jacobs Engineering where she worked, and didn't come to work that Monday the 28th either. And if you're curious, Mike worked as a pipeline engineering designer, and Lisa worked at an engineering company in Human Resources Accounts Payable Administration. Her coworkers were very concerned because Lisa wasn't only dependable, but being on the edge of retirement, this was extremely unusual.
Right.
For her not to want to celebrate the end of her career with her coworkers.
Sure, they're going to have a big cake and everything.
Right. Due to their concern, one of Lisa's coworkers called police to do a welfare check.
Oh, shit.
I know. Officer Steve Ballard was dispatched on Monday the 28th to do the welfare check. He arrived to the guy's home on Golden View Lane and walked to the front door. While there, he rang the doorbell. There was no answer despite there being a light on in the foyer of the home, as well as 2 cars in the driveway. He noticed the home had a for sale sign in the yard, but there was no lockbox at the front door, which he thought was strange. Officer Ballard knocked a few more times, to no avail. He didn't look into any of the windows of the home due to it being a safety issue for police.
What?
He testified to this. It's an officer safety issue.
Didn't know that.
I know. Me neither. At that point, not being able to do much else than knock on the door, Officer Ballard left. He did return to the home about an hour or so later after a detective with the police department, Detective Jeremy McCord, received a phone call from another of Lisa's coworkers who was concerned that she was missing. Detective McCord, Officer Ballard, and 2 other members of the Knoxville police did the welfare check this time. So there's 4 members of the police department now.
They should be able to look in a window.
I know.
I'm calling some bullshit on this whole... I'm still thinking about that window.
I know. I know when I'm like, you're doing a welfare check and you're just out there ding dong, and then you leave?
Because if someone wants to shoot them, they can shoot them whether they're up close peeking in a window or 5 feet away. Whatever. Okay, I'm with you. Go ahead. They better peek in that fucking window.
They do. They again rang the doorbell with no answer. The 2 cars were still in the driveway, and the light in the foyer was still on. Officer Ballard checked around the rear of the house and saw that the doorknob on the back door was completely missing, which he found incredibly strange. Detective McCord soon joined him in the back of the house and looked inside the home. You could actually look inside the home through the hole in the doorknob, or through the hole where the doorknob was.
But what if someone pokes his eye out with a pencil or something while he's looking?
Isn't it an officer safety issue? They would eventually realize that the doorknob from the back door was put on the front door because there was a lockbox originally on the front door, and the person who switched it didn't want anyone to be able to access the home. Detective McCord ended up looking inside the home and saw groceries, still in their bags, strewn about the foyer. And there were a couple cases of beer, there's toilet paper. It was kind of just like a mess in the foyer.
Beer?
Mm-hmm. There was at least 3 cases that I noticed in the photo. The detective also noticed there was some raw meat in the bags. Specifically, he saw a thing of bacon and lunch meat and some of that Jimmy Dean sausage that comes in the plastic wrap. And knowing that no one was answering and no one had answered a couple hours earlier, he just started to wonder, like, how long have these groceries been sitting there? It was a very unusual sight.
Beer's getting warm.
It really is. Detective McCord and the other officers decided that exigent circumstances existed, and therefore one of them hit the garage door opener that was in one of the cars, which, of course, the garage door opened up, and they went into the house through the door in the garage. It was unlocked. Upon entering the home, the officers first noticed how warm it was. The thermostat was set for 90 degrees.
Woo!
It was very hot in there.
That's even warm for me. I'm always cold.
Yeah, it's extremely warm. And in addition to that, they would go on to find some space heaters throughout the home. So it was really hot in there. Officer McCord noticed in addition to the heat, there was a smell of decomposition and a, quote, weird smell of chemical cooking, unquote. The officers began clearing the home, like going into each room and clearing it and announcing themselves as they walked around. Knoxville police. They came into the foyer where the groceries were strewn about and the meat was warm to the touch, indicating it had been there a while. Body cam footage from the visit shows officers going into the dining room and finding many rifles and shotguns and ammunition on the dining room table and also stacked on the floor. There was a lot of guns.
Was Mike an avid gun fanatic?
Yes, he was. But I don't know if he stored them in the dining room like this. They were literally laying on the table, and then there was a section on the floor in the corner where there were several rifle/shotgun type weapons. As they moved upstairs, they found a large, dark reddish brown stain at the top of the stairs of what looked like blood. There was also women's clothing in a neat pile near the stain. I mean, they weren't folded, but they were just all together. And also large bottles. And when I say bottles, it looks kind of like large bleach bottles. Like you'd buy a big...
Chemical bottles?
Yes. Like
cleaning bottles?
It was a chemical bottles. And what it was, bottles of sewer line cleaner.
Like liquid plumber?
Kind of like liquid plumber. It wasn't called liquid plumber, though. It was called sewer line cleaner, and it's otherwise known as sodium hydroxide.
Oh, now that you say that, I know exactly what it is. Whatever.
It's very, very caustic and can burn the skin if it comes in contact with it. As the officers moved further down the upstairs hallway to the bedrooms and bathrooms, they found a startling sight in one of the bedrooms.
Oh, tell me.
Inside the bedroom was workout equipment. So it's kind of like the workout room, spare room. Specifically, there was a Bowflex that was overturned. And there was also, in one of the corners of the room, there was large smear stains where it looked like a struggle took place. And the smears were dark reddish brown liquid and probably blood. So this room looks like there's this huge struggle had taken place. And horrifyingly, there was a pair of men's hands severed at the wrists on the floor near that corner where the blood smears were.
A pair of hands.
Mm-hmm. And just to give you an idea, the smears probably went up the wall about 4 feet or so. So it's these huge stains, and then there's this pair of hands and the overturned Bowflex. The officers called for backup at this point.
Good idea.
There's at least one body, probably dead, inside the home.
And they know they still have to search other rooms.
Mm-hmm. The medical examiner arrived with a death investigator. I didn't know there was such a job as a death investigator. And they found a disturbing crime had taken place. Upstairs, in the bathroom of the master bedroom, there were 2 large blue Sterilite plastic totes with what prosecutors would describe as a, quote, diabolical stew of human remains inside of it.
Gross.
There were body parts in each tote, and they were soaking in a mixture of what later would be found to be liquid fire, sodium hydroxide, the sewer line cleaner, and sulfuric acid.
What the hell is liquid fire? Is this a real thing? Are you just
Yes.
Are you fucking with me?
No, I'm not fucking with you. It is an actual product called liquid fire. It is another acid.
Okay.
The sides of the tote were starting to bow outward by the time they were found, and the medical examiner was afraid that if the totes were moved to her office, as they were when they were found, there was a real possibility they would break down and everything would spill out of them.
Yeah, how is the tote not broken down by all the caustic chemicals?
Right, exactly. And it's starting because there's bow. You can see it. So what the medical examiner had to do was remove the liquid in the totes, basically wearing a hazmat suit, like pumping the liquid out of it into a big drum. And there'll be a picture of it on the website.
TNTcrimes.com.
TNTcrimes.com. And once the liquid was gone, they then were able to take inventory of what was in the totes, which were body parts, before they could finally transport everything to the medical examiner's office for autopsy. Before I tell you, though, about the autopsy and what exactly was in these totes. We're going to take a break. The medical examiner, Dr. Amy Hawes, would eventually identify the bodies as Mike and Lisa Guy, in case you hadn't figured that out yet. Mike's autopsy showed he had been dismembered, his arms were removed at the shoulder blades, and his legs were removed at the hips. His right foot was removed at the ankle. His head was described as skeletonized, literally down to the bone. And there was something the medical examiner said, quote, was a defect of bone in the forehead, end quote, meaning that Dr. Hawes couldn't tell if the poor condition of the head was from blunt trauma or from the chemicals it had been soaking in.
Were his hands cut off?
Yes, they were his hands. The only skin that remained on Mike's body was on his back, and the skin that remained was from his lower neck to his buttocks. The rest of his torso showed exposed bare muscle. The skin had been dissolved by the chemical bath they were sitting in.
Oh my God. You know how nasty that chemical bath had to be?
I know.
Oh, Jesus.
I know. Some of Mike's limbs had a severe loss of tissue. For example, at least one of his arms, if not both, were already down to the bone.
Wow.
There were so many wounds on his torso that Dr. Hawes had a difficult time in counting them all. But she determined that Mike had been attacked from behind and had at least 34 sharp force injuries on his back.
So he was stabbed.
They were stabs or cuts that extended from his shoulder to his buttocks on both sides of his back.
What?
They ranged from 1 to 7 inches in length, and the maximum depth of the wounds was 6 inches.
So it was a big blade.
All of these wounds were inflicted when Mike was still alive. He had severe injuries to his liver, both lungs, both kidneys, and multiple ribs. 6 on the left and 6 on the right were severed, and the cuts lined up with the stab wounds on his back.
Severed ribs?
Severed ribs.
How does one sever a rib?
I thought about that. I have no idea. Did you stab someone so hard it severed their rib?
No, I didn't.
Could you? I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't know how that happens. I mean, it has to be pretty forceful, for one thing.
I've just never heard of such a thing, but I believe you.
There were likely more wounds to Mike, but due to the dismemberment process, it was difficult for Dr. Hawes to decide if the wounds were a result of being dismembered or if they were caused at a different time in the attack. Mike also suffered 5 stab wounds to the left side of his abdomen, and there was a large area on his right abdomen where the abdominal wall was missing and his bowels were protruding.
Oh, gross. Poor Mike.
Poor Mike. Dr. Hawes would later opine that these wounds were deliberately caused by the murderer as a way for the chemicals to seep into the body cavity more quickly.
Oh, that makes sense. I get it. Okay.
And hasten the dissolving of the body.
What happened to good old-fashioned burying in the woods?
Honestly. Well, that's not what's going on here for sure. As I mentioned, the skin on the front of Mike's body was gone, and the only body part of his that still had the skin fully intact were his hands that we talked about earlier.
But those weren't in the chemicals.
No, they weren't in the chemicals. So that's why they were the only body part to still have skin. They were actually in pretty good condition. They showed a picture of them at trial. And there were many wounds on his hands. Most were superficial defensive wounds found on the palms of his hands and on the palm side of his fingers. Dr. Hawes determined that Mike's cause of death was multiple sharp force injuries. Dr. Hawes also performed Lisa's autopsy. Oh, I didn't warn everybody that it was gruesome. Shit.
That's all right. They figured it out now, Tanya.
What was done to Lisa is a little bit worse than what was done to Mike. Lisa's head was severed from her body, and it was described that her head was not only cut, but it was also torn or broken from her body.
Ooh.
So do with what you will with that little bit of information.
What?
I know. And her head wasn't found in the blue Sterilite bin in the master bathroom. It was found in a very large cooking pot.
Oh, stop.
On the stove.
No, it wasn't. Nope.
I'm sorry.
No.
And it had been cooked in what appeared to be water. There was no chemical smell to the liquid in the pot. It only had a slight decomposition smell, which is why it's believed that it was just water.
Was the stove on when they got there?
No, the stove wasn't on.
Disgusting.
The skin on her scalp remained and her hair was still intact, which led Dr. Hawes to believe that it was water in the pot. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure it probably would have dissolved by then.
I don't know. You're looking at me like I have an answer to this.
I don't know either, but I'm thinking yes, because the chemicals are very caustic, and I would think... Anyway, I'm not a chemical engineer or a chemist, but I'm thinking that that's what would happen.
She's not a trained professional.
Lisa's arms had been removed from her body like Mike's, and also like Mike's, her legs were removed. However, hers were removed at the knee, whereas his had been removed at the hip. I'm not sure why.
Disarticulation is allegedly not an easy process, and I am just surprised at how much disarticulation is going on in this story.
Honestly, it had to take a while, right? The skin on Lisa's back was well preserved, like Mike, but the skin on the front of her torso was gone, eaten away by the chemicals.
So they must have been laying face down?
Face down in the tubs.
So their back would be floating up, maybe.
Right, and that's what it was described as. There were body parts floating in the tubs.
Oh, nasty.
So I'm thinking they were face down, and the back was probably what was exposed and not covered by chemicals, 24/7. Lisa suffered at least 25 sharp injuries to both the front and back of her body, as well as both the left and right sides. She had 5 stab wounds to her buttocks, and all of these injuries were inflicted when she was still alive. She had a large cutting wound on the right side of her abdomen and a large wound on her back in the lumbar region, which was possibly related to an attempt at dismembering her there. So it's your lower back.
So then she would have been alive for that one.
Right. Her internal organs were visible on a large portion of the front of her torso and across her abdomen. She also had injuries to her ribs, with 12 ribs severed on her left and 9 on her right, consistent with her stab wounds. So again, we have these severed ribs. Dr. Hawes estimated that both Mike and Lisa were alive for several minutes before they finally succumbed to their injuries. The injuries to their lungs would have made breathing difficult, and sadly, neither that nor the blood loss they suffered would have killed them right away. Crime scene investigators processed the crime scene and ended up collecting hundreds of pieces of evidence. I believe I read there was 700 pieces of evidence in this case. Among the evidence were bottles of liquid fire, sewer cleaner, alcohol, like rubbing alcohol, and hydrogen peroxide. Police also found a bag with receipts from Walmart. The investigators reviewed the surveillance video from Walmart and found that Joel Michael was the one who had purchased some of the items they found in the home. Specifically, they saw him purchase the plastic Sterilite bins from a Walmart in Knoxville.
Did he get a Beanie Baby while he was there?
Do they sell them at Walmart?
I don't know.
I don't know either. Once they found out that Joel Michael had spent the Thanksgiving holiday at his parents' home, he became suspect number 1. However, he was nowhere to be found. One of the items that was found in the home was a laptop belonging to Joel Michael, and after it had been analyzed, they discovered someone had been using it while the body parts were dissolving in the master bedroom, like the same time. Police really needed to find Joel Michael and eventually found him in Baton Rouge where he lived. They discovered that he had sought medical treatment for cuts on his hands at Louisiana State University's Student Health Center, telling doctors he had injured himself when he had, quote, tumbled down 3 steps carrying breakables on Sunday. That's how he explained away the wounds. He would change that story in December 2019 at a hearing where he agreed to stipulate that his hands were injured in an altercation with his parents. The cuts he had on his hands were a cut on his right palm and a very deep cut on his left thumb, which was so severe he worried that he might lose it. Joel Michael claimed he went to Louisiana for medical treatment because he didn't have any health insurance. After he was treated at the Louisiana State Student Center, he returned to the home in Knoxville, between Monday night and Tuesday morning. By then, the murder investigation was in full swing. He saw the crime scene tape around the house. He saw his parents' cars were gone. And he saw police cars. So instead of inquiring as to what happened, he just turned around and left and went back to Baton Rouge. Joel Michael was arrested on Tuesday, November 29th, the day after the welfare check was done, in Baton Rouge, which police believe was 3 days after his parents were killed, possibly even 4. I'm thinking he killed them on Saturday. He was charged with first-degree murder, felony murder, and abuse of a corpse.
That's putting it lightly.
The police searched his apartment and car, and in the trunk of his car, they found a meat grinder.
What?
A meat grinder.
A meat grinder.
And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that later. They found a container of gasoline and a receipt from Walmart in Knoxville. Joel Michael filed a motion to act as his own attorney at trial.
Of course he did.
It was granted, but it was very limited scope. The judge limited it to be only for motions which would allow either the judge or jury to impose the death penalty if he were convicted. But the prosecutors weren't going to seek the death penalty, so it was really kind of a moot point. Additionally, there were other motions filed to exclude evidence taken from his apartment in Baton Rouge, and the judge ruled in his favor.
I bet it was videos of him masturbating to Beanie Babies.
God, I hope not.
That's my guess.
However, the evidence they found at the crime scene was still admissible. His trial was initially set to start in February of 2020, but it got delayed until late September 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Fuck COVID.
During the trial, Joel Michael's 3 half-sisters testified. His half-sister Angela testified and said that she had text conversations with her dad and Lisa about their upcoming retirement. Lisa had told her that it was finally time for Joel Michael to stand on his own 2 feet, to grow up and be an adult.
He had to put his big boy panties on.
Exactly. Basically meaning they were no longer going to be able to financially support him. Her dad and Lisa had put together a post-retirement budget, even budgeting for their beer and cigarettes. And there just wasn't any room for money for Joel Michael. Angela described how the family was planning that big Christmas get-together in Surgoinsville. And she also told the court that she really didn't have a relationship with Joel Michael. Joel Michael's half-sister, Shandice, testified that she hadn't heard from her dad the weekend after Thanksgiving, which was really unusual because November 27th, that Sunday, was her birthday. And her dad never missed wishing her a happy birthday. Mike's sister, Renee, testified. She also said she didn't have a relationship with her nephew, Joel Michael.
Because he's a weirdo.
Honestly, he is a weirdo. Mike's daughter, Michelle, also testified. She was the twin with Angela and the one that attended Thanksgiving dinner. I mentioned that she was doing her laundry. Remember that her dryer had broke? The one thing I didn't mention was that she noticed these strange interactions with Joel Michael and the rest of the family. She also was doing her laundry, and he was like her shadow. Every time she would turn, he was there. And the laundry room was upstairs where the bedrooms were. So I was really thinking about it, like, why was he doing this? He wasn't staying in his room. He's doing this family interaction that he never did. And why is he on her like a hawk? And I'm thinking there had to be chemicals and maybe plastic sheeting or all the stuff he bought to prepare for killing his parents. It must have been upstairs in either his bedroom or somewhere up there. And maybe he was afraid that she would find it. And so he was up there to prevent her from going anywhere else in the house. She also mentioned that Mike had cameras, security cameras in their house. They were there Thanksgiving Day, but they were gone after that. I just included this part because I thought it was weird. And it kind of shows you a little bit into Joel Michael's personality. He had a friend testify. Mr. McCracken told the court that Joel Michael didn't have many friends, wasn't close to his family. In the 10 years that they were friends, he had never met Mike and had only met Lisa once. He knew that Joel Michael's parents supported him, paying his car, tuition, rent, other bills, and his utilities. Joel Michael didn't have a job, so his parents 100% supported him.
Did he have some sort of condition or something?
No.
Okay.
He was studying to be a plastic surgeon.
Oh.
Mr. McCracken described Joel Michael as socially awkward and someone who purposely isolated himself from other people. On the second day of trial, September 30th, there was some bombshell evidence presented. Police officer Rachel Sandlin, who was a forensic officer who had photographed the entire crime scene, testified to a notebook that belonged to Joel Michael, which was found with his belongings at the Knoxville house. The notebook was quite damning. I'm going to read you what was in it, and it was named the Book of Premeditation during the trial. Because Joel Michael is so specific in his plan to murder his parents, he literally accounted for everything. And like a true dipshit, wrote it all down. It's amazing how he planned it. He must have watched a lot of forensic files. I mean, really.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No, there's nothing wrong with that. But
I may have also watched a lot of forensic files.
I have as well. But it just amazed me. So page 1 that they presented, it said, get killing knives, multiple. Set carving knives to make small pierce.
What?
Get sledgehammer, crush bones. Bring blender and food grinder, grind meat.
What the fuck?
Get bleach, denature proteins. Get plastic bin for denaturation process. Does not matter where they're killed. Just get rid of bloody spots to prevent evidence of time of death. And then in parentheses, not the mattresses or couches, end of parentheses. Get rid of bodies inside house, there and my DNA already there. Then he had crossed out open doggy door to provide entryway.
Like the murder went through the doggy door?
I know.
Okay.
Right?
All right.
Then he says, flush chunks down toilet. And in parentheses, not garbage disposal, end parentheses.
Yeah, because that'll get clogged.
Get plastic sheeting for disposal process. He crossed out, get hollow point bullets just in case. Then he wrote, be seen buying bullets. Check to make sure there are bullets, parentheses, last resort. Then he wrote, money, arrow, all mine.
Wow. He's a dipshit. He left this at the murder scene.
And it's pages.
Why would he? What?
He said, flood the house, covers up forensic evidence. Turn heat up as high as it goes. Arrow, speed decomposition. Bleach reacts with luminol just like blood. Arrow, douse area. Big sprayer. Lie. Trash compactor, question mark. Body gives time of death. Arrow, alibi. Don't have to get rid of body if there's no forensic evidence on the body. Then he wrote in big letters, his fingerprints and DNA. Page 2 said, minimize things I touch throughout visit. Wear gloves and socks to prevent fingerprints and footprints. Drop something down the garbage disposal to break it. Arrow, get him on the ground fixing it. Arrow, kill him with the knife.
Oh.
Like that's how he was going to ambush his dad. That's not what ended up happening.
Oh.
Clean up the mess before she gets home. Kill her with knife. Then he crossed out, kill dog after. Thankfully, he didn't kill the family dog.
Why's he gotta kill the family dog?
He decided against it. Then he wrote, take dog with you. Then he said, place her in shower, turn on hot water, and point at her to get rid of forensics. Remove her clothes and take them with me for disposal. Place him in plastic bin and use it to get him into the upstairs bathroom. Cut off his arm and plant his flesh under her fingernails. Place her hand with his DNA so that his DNA is not washed away by the shower. So I guess her arm's going to stick out while he's showering away other evidence. Use sodium hydroxide to destroy his soft tissue and soften bones for transport. Baste once every hour to accelerate.
Baste?
Baste like a turkey.
Oh.
Flush sodium hydroxide down the toilet. Wash out bin with handheld shower head and then direct handheld into toilet to flush everything out of the pipes and into the public waterway. Douse killing rooms, kitchen, with bleach. Place hair curler with flammable paper and flammable containers of gasoline in 4 locations. His killing room, her killing room, and bathrooms. Turn up heat to 90 degrees to melt fingerprints. Can you do that?
I don't know.
And dry everything. I don't know either. I didn't think you could melt fingerprints.
I don't think so.
set her phone to send me a text message late Sunday to prove that I was in Baton Rouge and she was alive. I didn't know you could do that with cell phones.
Maybe. Can you? I'm going to have to look into that.
I know. Leave through front door and wipe down doorknobs. It's a house you've been in. Why would you need to wipe your fingerprints off? Time for flammables set for Friday at 10 a.m. Sunlight masks fire, parentheses, but not smoke. Page 3 said ultraviolet light shows fingerprints. Check mail before leaving to get rid of blood use peroxide. And underneath it, he had an arrow pointing to it that said hemoglobin, and bleach with the arrow pointing that said DNA. So maybe hydrogen peroxide gets rid of hemoglobin and bleach gets rid of DNA.
Sounds good to me.
Page 4 was titled Destruction of Bodies. Composition of body, 20% fat, 20% protein, 55% water, 5% other compounds.
Oh.
I know.
Damn, he did his research.
He really did.
For being a dumbass.
The last page was important because it was titled Assets. Her assets, her life insurance, $500,000, possibly more with double indemnity, which is if you die by accident. With him missing/dead, I get the whole thing. All her other assets are joint, so she must have had a life insurance policy that was specifically only for him. All other assets are joint, go to him if missing, unknown if he is dead. His assets includes all joint property if missing. When he gets all joint property, also gets joint debt. Knoxville house, homeowner's insurance possibly, but probably worthless after fire. Oh, $100K. Surgoinsville house, appraised at $400K. Worthless with Renee on the property.
Who's Renee?
His aunt, Mike's sister that testified at trial. Her car, his SUV, not paid for. His boat, his old truck, paid for. His 401k, $80,000, possibly less after taxes. He could possibly have savings and or investment accounts.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
He literally planned everything.
I wonder how long he's been planning it for.
I know. I would love to know.
Because he got a lot of details.
He was going to dissolve their muscles and everything and then crush their bones with a sledgehammer.
So why the pot with his mom's head boiling?
Right. Why did he do that? I don't know. That's a good question because he left Mike's head on his body. Like, why would he do that to his mother?
Boiling it.
I know. Why?
That's unnecessary.
That's a good psychological question. In case you're wondering what the motive,
I think I figured it out.
Was the $500,000 because his parents weren't going to pay his bills anymore. But his plan was to kill his mother, frame Mike for killing Lisa, and then make it look like Mike disappeared. So eventually when Mike disappears and he's then pronounced dead, probably by court a few years later, then everything will go to Joe Michael. Although I don't know if he didn't realize he's got 3 half-sisters that he would have to split any assets with if his parents didn't have a will. They did find lots of things at the crime scene. I mentioned the meat grinder that was in his car. They did find a blender in the master bedroom. I don't think it was used, though.
What kind of a monster could do this to his parents for days?
Right. Anyway, he was found guilty on October 2nd, 2020. Victim impact statements were read. And the only reason I'm bringing it up was Michelle, who was Mike's daughter. She just said something really sad. That she said Joel Michael was Lisa's whole world and that to her, he had a perfect childhood. And she, meaning Michelle, wondered when Joel Michael was killing Lisa, who was the love of her life, her only child, if she even fought back while he was killing her because she probably had a broken heart. And I was like, I can't imagine that moment of realization when your child is trying to kill you. And one more thing before I end the episode is if this story wasn't bizarre enough, Joel Michael handwrote a letter addressed to the Tennessee Department of Corrections dated October 8th, 2020, which was only 6 days after he was convicted. In it, he described he was fantasizing about gouging the eyes out of another inmate, and he wanted to use his bare hands. He stressed he wanted to use his bare hands and that, quote, a no sharps restriction will accomplish nothing, end quote. The letter was introduced by the prosecution in the sentencing portion of his trial.
This is before he even got sentenced?
Yes. It has evidence that he should be sentenced to consecutive life sentences. Joel Michael wrote it in the hopes of being moved to solitary confinement. I don't think it was granted, though. The judge sentenced him to 2 consecutive life sentences, plus 4 years for the 2 counts of abuse of a corpse. During the sentencing, the judge said, quote, "This wasn't just abuse of a corpse."
Yes, that's what I said. This is a little bit more than that.
Yeah, he said this was the most extreme form of abuse of a corpse I've seen in 25 years. Hopefully, it's the most severe I see in my entire career, however long that lasts. End quote.
But if there's another one, I would like to find the case.
I want to hear about it. So, that is my sad tale of Mike and Lisa Guy.
That's awful.
I know, this one was hard. And if anybody's interested, the trial is on YouTube. There's several portions of it. The thing that struck me while I was watching it, when, for example, the medical examiner's testifying and she's showing photos of certain things, he's turning around, he's just watching it. The camera's right on him. And he's just watching it like he's watching a baseball game. Like there's no reaction, anything. So before I go, I will mention the sources were the trial videos, the trial records, as well as several articles that I will list in the show notes. Oh, and before I forget, Emily
R.
Our listener, Emily R., she is the one who suggested this case.
She also suggested a Patreon episode we did on Aliana DeFries.
Oh, that was a sad one.
She's got some good ones.
So thank you, Emily.
Shout out to Emily.
You rock. Thank you, everyone, for listening. If you haven't already, please subscribe or follow us on whatever app you're using to listen. You can find out more about this episode from our website, tntcrimes.com. As we mentioned a couple times, there's photos. Also, if you're interested in becoming a member, there's information on our website, or you can go to patreon.com/tntcrimes. We have lots of extra episodes that have been unreleased and they're for members only.
And by doing that, you help support us because we don't really make a lot of money doing a podcast.
We do it just for the fun of it.
We really do, which is twisted.
I know. Lastly, you can find us on social media.
Mm-hmm.
On Facebook and Instagram at
Hardcore True Crime.
Thank you to Leah.
You're welcome.
And I think that's it.
I just want to point out that if you notice when you're looking at your app that we have missing episodes, those are now free on our website. And also don't forget, tomorrow you'll be getting a feed drop for The Devil Within.
Thank you for the reminder.
You're so welcome, Tanya.
Anyway, until our next episode.
Stay safe and don't kill each other.
Bye.
Bye.